hey, it's always good to reach out to your congressman and say, hey, we need HALU, we need to get things going. There's no doubt about that. And Congress at the end of the day is going to be, they're the ones who authorized it now. They can put pressure on the administration to move. So that's helpful too. So that's what I'd say. Just get involved.
Just because the facts are A, if the narrative is B and everyone believes the narrative, then B is what matters. But it's our job in our industry to speak up proudly, soberly, and to engage people in this dialogue. Those 2.5 billion people that are in energy poverty, they need us.
America cannot meet this threat alone.
If there is a single country,
of course, the world cannot meet it without America.
that is willing to
We're going to need you, the next generation, to finish the
overhaul
job.
nuclear regulation,
We need scientists to design new fuels.
focus on net public
We
benefit
need engineers to invent new technologies. We
over absurd levels of radiation
need
protection,
entrepreneurs to sell those
then
technologies.
we will march towards this.
We need workers to operate assembly lines that hum with high-tech, zero-carbon
We have
components.
unlimited prosperity for all humans.
We need diplomats and businessmen and women and Peace Corps volunteers to help developing nations skip past the dirty phase of development and transition to sustainable sources of energy. In other words, we need you.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Fire to Fission podcast, where we talk about energy-dense fuels and how they can better human lives. Today, we're joined by Everett Redomond, Senior Director of Fuel Affairs with Oklo. How are you doing today, Everett?
Doing well, Mark. How are you?
I am ecstatic to be talking with you. Like I just said, on this podcast, we talk about energy-dense fuels, and we're here to talk to you about the most energy-dense fuel, uranium. So I'm really excited for this conversation. Everett, before we dive in to uranium and fuel cycle and HALU, why don't you give us some background on yourself?
Sure thing. Happy to. So I've been with Oklo since September of 2022. Prior to that, I was with the Nuclear Energy Institute, the trade association for the commercial nuclear power industry. I was there for 16 years doing a number of different things, from storage and transportation issues of spent fuel to advanced reactor work, which is what I was doing at the end, interfacing with all of the different advanced reactor companies out there. And then prior to NEI, I was with Holtec International working on spent fuel storage, both dry cask and wet storage. And then I've got a PhD in nuclear engineering from MIT.
What was the wet storage at Holtec? Was that actually in the spent fuels pools?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that. What wet storage means is in commercial reactors, light water reactors, the ones we have operating in the US right now, after the fuel is used and can no longer sustain the chain reaction, sustain fission, it is removed from the reactor and put into what we call a spent fuel pool. Basically, think of a large pool that's about 40 feet deep. So the fuel assembly sitting down in the bottom in a rack. Easiest way to think about that is like an egg crate. You have eggs sitting in their little spots. Fuel assemblies are the same way, in a crate down there in a rack down on the bottom with 20 feet of water sitting above them.
Awesome. And did you work on Holtec's project in New Mexico? Was that around
No,
that long ago? Or?
No, interestingly enough, so what you're referring to is the interim storage project that they have in New Mexico, which they just got the license for from NRC. That concept was around at the time I was with Holtec, but Holtec wasn't doing it. I actually worked on a project called Private Fuel Storage, which was going to be a similar effort, although in Utah, where utilities would ship fuel and store it there. They also got a license, but that never went anywhere. And so now Holtec's pursuing it again. Business model's different, so I wish them the best of luck with it.
Awesome. And why did you pivot from Holtec to NEI?
Oh, I'd been at Holtec for 10 years. It was time to do something a little bit different. In addition, for personal reasons, we needed to move from the area. My wife had her career opportunities, so that ended up with NEI, taking what I'd learned at Holtec in storage and transportation and now applying it to policy side of the house. Because NEI, as I said, is a trade association, so they represent the industry in front of Congress, the administration, and also the NRC on generic regulatory issues. So it was a perfect pivot there. But then I had the opportunity to get involved in interim storage issues at NEI and non-proliferation issues, fuel cycle issues, a wide variety of things actually, which was great. And then I started the advanced reactor work that they were doing. And then ultimately that led me to wanting to get back into the industry working for a private company. And here I am at Oklo.
Awesome. Yeah, the 16 years. I mean, we're talking now in May 2023, and that would have been 2007, 2008.
2006 is when I started. Yep.
2006. Okay, at NEI. What a roller coaster. I imagine it was full speed ahead, maybe in 2006, or maybe not.
No, it was actually. So yes, you're remembering well. So when I came into NEI, we were talking about the renaissance on nuclear, and that's before natural gas fracking had taken off. And then when natural gas fracking took off, well, the renaissance kind of went away. And a few other issues too, but it kind of went away. But then over the last decade, climate change and the challenges with that have built in. And so now you're seeing that whole, and we don't use the term renaissance, and I'm not going to, but you see that big shift and focus on advanced reactors and new development now. And every year it continues to get even more and more interesting and impressive.
Yeah, it feels like there's a lot of momentum building in the industry.
Oh, it's huge.
Especially since like the mid-20 teens. So, was there a specific project at NEI that you worked on that I guess was most interesting to you, or anything on the line?
Well, so in NEI, as I said, I did a wide variety of things. I actually kicked off the advanced reactor work. So it was a combination of us and Southern Company and EPRI that decided that NEI needed an advanced reactor working group. And so I led the formation of that. And then that kind of took on I don't want to say a life of its own, but it really grew into all of the efforts that NEI are doing now. And then I really enjoyed interfacing on back into the fuel cycle. I've been doing that a lot too. So interfaced with the Blue Ribbon Commission. That was after the Yucca Mountain project was terminated by the Obama administration. So that was really a unique opportunity there. So just a number of different things.
That's great. We're aware of you, and I'd met you at a conference previously, and we had chatted previously about kind of HALEU fuel and fuel in the US and what a bunch of advanced reactor companies had been pontificating about doing, and you're extremely well educated on this topic, and so wanted to get you on to chat about it. So HALEU, what is HALEU and why is it important?
So HALEU stands for high assay low enriched uranium, which means uranium enriched in the element U-235, in the isotope U-235 to less than 20%. So let me kind of start at the beginning. When you dig uranium out of the ground, it is a metal. When it comes out of the ground, it has 0.7% U-235, and for practical purposes, the remainder of it is U-238. We need to take that and enrich it, increase the amount of U-235 to be able to use it in a reactor. And real quick, the way that process is done is you take the uranium out of the ground. It's referred to as yellow cake because it ends up looking like a powder as an oxide. You take that and then you convert it to uranium hexafluoride. And from there, you send it to an enrichment facility, which is a set of centrifuges. So think about a salad spinner where you spin things around and the heavy stuff goes to the outside. You're using the same general concept here, although a little bit more technically advanced, to spin uranium hexafluoride and enrich it. And you enrich it up to about 5% for the fleet, so 5% U-235. And when I say fleet, I mean the reactors that are currently operating in the US, which are PWRs, pressurized water reactors, and boiling water reactors. After you enrich it, it goes to the fuel fabricator. Now, for us and many of the advanced reactor companies and almost all of the non-water-cooled reactor companies, we need enrichments higher than that. We need enrichments somewhere between, say, 15 and 19%. There is a demarcation line at 20%. So anything below 20% is referred to as low enriched uranium. Anything above 20% is referred to as high enriched uranium. The commercial industry only uses low enriched uranium, so that's where we're going to be. But we're going to be right up there at 19.75% for most of what we need. And so We need high assay, low enriched uranium because the design of the reactors. So ours is a microreactor. Oklo is designing a 15 megawatt electric microreactor that is liquid metal cooled using metallic fuel, and it's a fast reactor. So uses fast neutrons predominantly rather than thermal or slow energy neutrons that the fleet uses. And so as a result of the design and the characteristics, we need the higher enriched uranium, as do many of the other non-water cooled companies. And then that leads into, I think, some of your next questions in terms of supply.
So why the higher enriched? I mean, is it going to last longer? Is it have to do with cross sections? What's some of the benefits of having the higher enrichment?
Well, so the need for it has to do with the design of the reactor and the physics associated behind it. So fast reactors, for example, operate differently than light water reactors. There's huge advantages to them and to the design we're working on, not the least of which is you're not using high pressure systems. You're using liquid sodium. It has automatic feedback mechanisms. So there's some really great advantages to it. But that design, as a result of the fast reactor, needs to have the higher enrichment, excuse me, and then some of the thermal designs that are triso-based fuels, which is like graphite balls in a sense, billiard ball size or ping pong ball size, need high assay low enriched uranium because of the design. It also enables us to have a core life that's going to be about 10 years or longer. So you're going to see with many of the water cooled reactors a bit of a change in the refueling strategy. So, for example, our core is going to be in there for about 10 years. Currently, the fleet, the LWRs refuel about every 1.5 to 2 years. So they'll take a third of the core out, replace it with a third fresh, and keep going. Some of the newer high temperature gas reactors are going to do online refueling, basically replace a couple pebbles every day, sort of thing. And then there's another company working on fast reactor technology, somewhat similar to ours. It's going to have a 10 to 20 year lifetime as well.
Got it. So it's time between refueling and the physics of how reactors are designed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
That makes sense. Okay. What are some of the main sources of uranium? And I preface this question with, or I'd like to preface it with, sometimes you'll hear people talk about, oh, we have a limited supply of uranium, where, even if we went all nuclear, we would run out of uranium in 70 years if we used all of this strategy. And then you hear other people say like, well, no, there's lots of it in the ocean and it's actually like kind of a renewable resource, but it's just very diffuse. Like, what's the answer to this question?
Yeah, so that's a great one. I would say that we're not going to run out of uranium anytime soon. Okay. It's interesting. When I was growing up, and it dates me just a little bit, but when I was growing up, there was conversations about running out of oil. Well, we're not talking about that anymore.
We are, but they're just like, it's going to be a couple hundred years instead of in 5 years, right?
Exactly. As the need
At what price
increases,
are we going to run out of oil?
well, and that's it. And that's what it comes down to is you invent new technologies to do mining, to do extraction and stuff like that. You mentioned, for example, uranium in seawater. It is in seawater, and that's certainly a place for it. We don't get uranium from seawater right now because it's cost prohibitive to do so. But as you need more and more of it, you'll find it. So we're not going to run out of uranium anytime soon. Now, with that said, there are some other technologies, which I'll probably touch on in a bit, but let me back up to your question a little bit more. So uranium right now comes from a couple different countries mining. Kazakhstan, Canada, Australia are kind of three of the primary ones. The United States does mining as well, Wyoming, maybe some other areas, but we don't supply a great deal of it. It's a little bit more expensive to get uranium here than it is in the other countries I mentioned. So those are the predominant
Why is that, Everett? Is that a function of the concentrations or the regulations and mining practices that we might use in the US versus in other countries?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And unfortunately, I'm not able to really address that because I just simply don't have a good answer for that. I'm pretty confident in saying, though, that the regulatory side of it's not that big of a burden, unless, of course, it drives certain practices in terms of how you actually mine safety and stuff like that. But mining is depending on the state, is not regulated at the federal level. It may be regulated at the state level.
Gotcha. Okay, and I apologize to our listeners if there's sounds like there's honking or sounds in the background. I'm recording from random spot in California. So
Oh, you're good. I actually can't hear any of it, so I think we're fine.
excellent. Okay, cool. So HALEU, I mean, if we're doing this for design and many of the advanced reactors want this new type of fuel, and it's not necessarily new. We've used it before. We've used it in research reactors. We've used it.
Mhm.
The military's used it a lot. But some of the industry talks about supply chain constraints. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a big issue, actually. It's a huge issue. So the same technology that's used to enrich up to 5%, those centrifuges are the same ones that will go up to 20%. However, what they're going to do is the companies would build, we call them cascades, so groups of centrifuges together is referred to as a cascade. They'll build specific cascades for taking the enrichment above 5% and taking it up to 20. The companies, and understandably so, don't want to make an investment in that, building out that technology, unless they have a guaranteed order book, unless companies sign an agreement, sign a contract, I shouldn't say an agreement, sign a contract that says, I'll take the uranium from you at a certain price, no matter what else happens. In other words, if you don't even sell a reactor, you take it. And this creates a challenge for the advanced reactor companies because we're not in a position quite yet to sign those contracts. For example, Oklo is going to deploy our first reactor and then other reactors to follow afterwards. In fact, we announced that we're going to site 2 and 3 in Ohio. So we're making some big plans, but we're not quite in that position yet to sign those long-term contracts, neither are the other companies. And so in the United States, you've got one commercial enricher right now, Urenco, which is located in New Mexico. You have another company, Centrus, who is bringing online a pilot facility. I think it's actually up and running now in Ohio. And then internationally, you have the Russians, and the Russians can supply high-assay low-enriched uranium right now in whatever form you want it, and we want it in metal form. Other companies want it in oxide form. But the issue with Russia is the invasion in Ukraine's basically made that a untenable situation. So Russia's off the table. And so we need to develop this enrichment capability. I shouldn't say develop, it's really deploy this enrichment capability
Just
here
need
in
to
the
invest
United
it,
States.
build it, go build it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, what the government's trying to do, the Department of Energy, Congress instructed DOE to make that investment. I mean, all of the enrichment in the United States historically was funded initially by the government and then taken over by the private industry. So this would be similar. The government would help fund it through probably purchasing high-assay low-enriched uranium. So signing those firm contracts for, say, 10 years of offtake, for example, and then they would turn around and maybe make that material available to the industry. Also, once the enrichment capacity is stood up, it's actually quite simple for them to then add on additional cascades and expand quickly. As with anything, you've got to build out your supply chain. So you don't have companies out there building a ton of centrifuges right now. So it's going to take a while for them to ramp up. And once really somebody says go and the money starts flowing, we're looking at about 4 years before we can have significant commercial enrichment capability in the US. And so that would come soon, hopefully, get that money flowing. So we're waiting on Department of Energy to issue a draft request for proposal so we see how things are going, and then the industry will respond.
Gotcha. Are there certain companies that are better suited for this, or would this be an opportunity for a new player to step in?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the 4 primary companies that are doing enrichment, leading the way, if you will, Urenco has operating facilities in multiple countries. Orano operates enrichment in France. Then they had a license for a facility in the US, but because of the economic situation with the downfall of the Renaissance and stuff, they chose not to pursue that. Then there's Centrus, which I mentioned has a pilot facility in Ohio. And then there's Global Laser Enrichment, which is new technology. So laser enrichment technology. They don't have an operating facility yet, but they certainly are interested in pursuing enrichment for both the low enriched uranium and less than 5% and high assay low enriched uranium. And then I'm aware of another company or two that might have an interest in getting involved. So you never know until the RFP comes out and see who responds. But the four dominant ones at the moment are Urenco, Orano, Centrus, and GLE, and no
And why
particular
wouldn't
order there.
why wouldn't one of these companies step up and make the investment now? Is it really a chicken and egg problem? Meaning there's like no current buyers of the fuel, but then the
Yeah,
buyers are kind of in a tough spot because they don't have a guaranteed fuel supply. And so how do they get fuel long term to
yeah.
get investment
No,
from some, yeah,
it's completely a chicken and the egg problem. It's unfortunate. So one of the interesting things about centrifuge technology, those salad spinners, if you will, is once you turn them on, you keep them running. So once you turn on the system and you start pumping uranium hexafluoride through it, you pretty much got to keep them running and keep it operating. Those centrifuges don't, from a technology perspective, don't like to shut down, don't like to ramp up and ramp down. So they just keep them running. So that creates some additional challenges. You're not going to want to bring on more capacity than what you need, because you got to keep sending material through. So really, the enrichment companies are not in a position right now to bring on that capacity, make that investment in it without that guaranteed contract. I mean, we see similar challenge actually in supply chain for reactor components and things like that. I mean, a supplier doesn't necessarily want to make that investment in building out a facility or additional equipment or stuff like that unless they know they're going to have more than one contract. It's just not really worth it unless you're
it would be bad business. Irresponsible.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so for companies like ours, it's a challenge because we'll get to the point where we can sign the contracts for the long-term offtake, and we'll need the capacity to be there when we get there. But as you noted, we cannot deploy reactors without fuel. Now, interestingly enough for us, and thankfully for us, our first reactor, which I mentioned is targeting 2026, we're actually going to use HALEU that comes out of reprocessing, recycling of old spent experimental breeder reactor 2 fuel at Idaho National Laboratory. So that was high enriched uranium fuel that went into EBR2. It was used. Now they're processing it, converting it into HALEU, and we've got access to 5 metric tons of that, which will fuel our first core. So we're set for the first one, but then after that, I'm in the same situation as everybody else.
So earmarked for the first load to have proof of concept, demonstrate that it works, and then.
Yeah, I'd be cautious on the word demonstrate for just a second. I want to emphasize what we're doing.
Sure.
The reactor is going to be licensed by NRC, and it will be a commercial reactor. It is the first one, so it's kind of a demo in that sense, but it is
So yes, it
identical
does
in every
demonstrate, but
way
it's gonna
to,
be,
yeah.
yeah, it will be very commercial. Yeah, I expect good delineation there. You mentioned Russia earlier, and that we can't or aren't perhaps receiving fuel from them, but the U.S. was. I mean, am I wrong in this? When the conflict started, we still had commitments that were happening, and right?
We do still. Actually, the U.S. fleet, many of the current operators have long-term contracts with Russia, which are still being fulfilled. But the ability to, and nobody would want to sign a new contract with Russia. So long-term contracts are still being fulfilled, but you never know what's going to happen with that, given the situation. But yes, there is still material coming in right now, but the ability to sign new contracts is really off the table.
How much does it cost? Is there a cost difference between low enriched uranium and HALEU?
Yeah, there is actually. And the easiest way to think about it is so as I said at the beginning here, you're taking uranium out of the ground and then you're enriching it up. So every time you take uranium, which starts with 0.7% U-235, and we enrich it, you end up with some leftovers, which is lower enriched. We call it tails. So to make, say, 1,000 kilograms of 19.75 enriched uranium, I'm going to need a whole lot more uranium out of the ground than I will to get to 1,000 kilograms of 5%. So there's going to be a huge cost difference because of the fact that, one, I need a lot more uranium to begin with, which then means I need to pay a lot more for more conversion services, which then also means I have to pay more now for enrichment services. So it just compounds. So there is going to be a big difference, and it could be a factor of 8 to 10 more expensive. It depends. There's actually out there for your audience, folks, if you Google UX calculator, you can take a look at the online tool that can give price estimates based on spot prices right now for conversion services, enrichment services, and uranium services.
The nuclear industry touts all the time that it's super energy dense, and we love that. The physics are real and demonstrate that. But some people say the fuel's super cheap or should be cheap, but we have to do this enrichment step. How does that impact? When I've heard estimates, it's like 20% to a third of the cost of reactors or of producing the energy is just the fuel.
So it's going to actually depend very much on the design. So for smaller designs like ours, the fuel is going to be a significantly larger portion of the cost of the plant. For a large reactor, take a 1,000 megawatt reactor like Vogtle 3 and 4 that are coming online now, the fuel is a drop in the bucket. Now, yes, you have to continue to refuel every 18 to 24 months, put a third of the core in, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the price of the plant. And the other thing I'd emphasize here about nuclear relative to other things is, as I mentioned, so for the existing fleet, you have fuel on site in there. The plant operates, we refer to it as breaker to breaker. So from the time you come up to the time you go down, one plant actually just completed close to 500 days continual operation. And that's unheard of when looking at other energy sources out there, be it natural gas, coal, wind, or solar. And then also, so we have fuel on site. For our reactor, it's going to be about 10 years before refueling. With coal, you do it daily. You bring coal in all the time. With natural gas, it's a pipeline. Yeah, exactly. And with gas, it's a pipeline. And with wind and solar, you don't have any of that, but it's not operating all the time. So there's unique things here. So when looking at fuel, yes, fuel is not cheap, but you have to look at it in that overall context of the cost of the plant and the cost of operations. So fuel is really not, for us, it's a bigger percentage than it is others, but perfectly economical, viable for us as well as others.
How many people will it take to operate one of these HALEU facilities? Do you know that?
No, I don't. I'm not sure how many people are out there at Urenco's facility right now, and I don't really want to speculate on
It's
that.
a pretty
because
big
I'm
facility.
not sure.
It is.
I've
looked into it.
Yeah.
It seems like I've met a few people that work there.
Yeah.
Meaning, I would guess between 50 and I'll give a broad range, 300, 400 people maybe, but I'd be surprised if it's more than that. Do you think that like old coal mine sites would be kind of an ideal site to site a new plant like this? I'm just spitballing here. If there was a coal mine that was closing and they wanted to repurpose the surface, and I mean, shoot, there's even some mine tailings there. I don't think it's separate and try and get some uranium out of it on site.
Well, I don't think that would happen, but different sites, you can build an enrichment facility pretty much wherever you want to. As I said, you got one in New Mexico right now, one in Ohio, so you could do it kind of wherever you wanted to. It'll be interesting to see what the companies choose to do. I would expect that some of the existing sites would be used for just basically expanding capacity. Now, with that said, there's another aspect here to high assay low enriched uranium, which I haven't touched on, which is, although I kind of alluded to it, I said I need metal form of uranium. So when
let's talk about that.
Yeah, when uranium hexafluoride is enriched, it comes out of the enrichment plant as uranium hexafluoride. Right now, for the light water reactors, it is sent to the fuel fabricator where they convert it into uranium dioxide pellets, ceramic pellets that are used in the fuel. For us, we need metal, and we're going to take uranium metal and make it into fuel. For others, they need uranium oxide. And
And the uranium hexafluoride is a gas when it comes out, right?
yes, it is. Well, it's a gas at higher temperatures and a solid at lower temperatures.
Okay.
There's a sublimation point in there. But anyways, yeah, let's just say it's a gas. We'll go with that. So you've got to convert it into uranium oxide or uranium metal, and that's going to be done at a different facility and by a different company. So it's not going to be Urenco, it's not going to be Centrus, it's not going to be GLE that does it, because that's not what they do. They do enrichment. So somebody else would do, we call it deconversion, if you will, deconverting from UF6 into something else. That facility is going to have to be built, and where is up in the air. It depends on the companies and what they want to do.
And so that doesn't exist now, but that's an opportunity in the US that, hey, we anticipate there's going to be lots of advanced nuclear reactors being built. They all want HALEU. They're all getting licensed and designed right now and applying for licenses with the NRC to have HALEU. There's been hundreds of millions of dollars of investment being put into this project right now. And where's it going to come from? And this step has to happen. So
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. You have to have the enrichment, and then you have to have that deconversion of uranium hexafluoride. And each individual company could do it if they so choose to build out that capacity, but it's preferable for us to have another company do that and who specializes in it and do that deconversion.
yeah. So you'd ship from the enrichment facility to the deconversion and then use that plant.
Right.
Yeah. Send it to the
Right.
Yeah. You said 4 years. Why? What's the 4-year target for standing up one of these facilities?
It really just is the practical time it takes. There's a licensing effort with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which could be 18 to 24 months. And then it's building out the supply chain and the demand and getting the supply chain stood up and executing on the project. So that's your practical time to do it. I wish it could be shorter, but it's not going to be able to be much shorter, if any.
So with 2026, you guys building your first reactor, and I mean, other companies coming out, announcements have been, hey, we're going to have more reactors built, hopefully by the late 2020s, early 2030s. That's good timing, right? I mean, it would be good to start now.
Oh, no, absolutely. In fact,
things.
Oklo could probably deploy another reactor would like to deploy one in 27 and 28 if we had HALEU. Your audience may have seen TerraPower made a public announcement at the end of last year and they're one of the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program winners, the DOE program. They made an announcement that they're pushing their date out to 2030 startup date because of lack of HALEU. So it has a direct impact right now, and we're really waiting for the government, the administration, the Department of Energy to move forward here. Congress has put money into it. More money is needed.
How much have they put in, and why is there more money needed?
Yeah, so they've put in $700 million right now, and that was in the Inflation Reduction Act last year. And 500 of that will go directly towards enrichment capabilities. So that's enough to kick this off. And they authorized the program. It's called the Advanced Nuclear Fuel Availability Program. It was authorized a number of years ago now. And so they finally put some significant money into it. But why are we going to need more money? Well, you're looking at, if you were to buy, say, 20 metric tons of high assay low enriched uranium a year, that could be, and do that for, say, 10 years on a contract, you could be looking at close to $2 billion or more in cost. Now, the Department of Energy will know exactly what they're planning to do. So I'm speculating at the moment. But one option is for them to buy the material and then turn around and make it available, sell it back to the industry. Or they buy the material and the industry can come in and buy it directly from the enricher. Number of different combination options. But you're going to have the money to be able to do it. So 500 million is a good number to kick it off. It's not sufficient to complete this project.
So just circling back to some of these numbers, but 20 metric tons a year, what is that number significant? And I think you mentioned 5,000 tons or 5 tons. I'm forgetting the order of magnitude here. Like how much?
Oklo needs 5 metric tons for what we utilize. So that's what we're doing. And the Department of Energy has already talked about, they had an industry day back in October, and they were talking about maybe incentivizing 20 to 25 metric tons a year. So that's a really good start in terms of what's needed. The Nuclear Energy Institute, actually, when I was there, I drafted the letters. So there's some letters on NEI's website that talk about what the potential need is for a HALEU, and it's considerably more than 25 metric tons a year from a variety of companies. But 25 is a good starting point if the department can do it, because as I said, you're able to build out additional capacity quickly. So it's not like if it's going to take me 4 years to build out, say, 20 metric tons of capacity, I don't have to wait another 4 years to get 20 metric tons of capacity to go up to 40. I get that first 4 years, I get my 20 metric tons of capacity. They will have licensed the facility for much larger, so they won't have to do licensing efforts necessarily, and they'll just add centrifuges as they go along, or whatever it is on the deconversion side. And so you'd be able to build out that additional capacity much quicker. So 20 to 25 may not solve all of our problems, but it's not necessarily intended to. It's intended to kick it off and get this whole thing going.
The total demand, like you said, it's not going to solve all our problems, but I mean, we might need 100, 200, 500 metric tons a year, right? If Oklo's building X number of reactors a year, and then X Energy, and
Completely.
the Radiant guys, and there's a lot of people that are using or have plans. USMC all have plans essentially to use HALEU.
It's going to take off. The whole nuclear industry is going to take off here. We're talking to a number of different customers. We have 700 megawatts of interest in MOUs and LOIs. And you've seen, and one thing that's really fascinating is X Energy's teamed up with Dow. So you have a chemical company now that's interested in new nuclear, and that's just going to be the first. So we're going to see nuclear being used for a lot more than just electricity, which is going to make this skyrocket. So yes, the demand is going to go up dramatically once we start really deploying these.
It'll
for
take
HALEU, that
capital
is.
investment from the enricher and from the deconversion group, because like the enricher has to buy the uranium from the miners, right?
So interestingly enough, the way it's done in the United States is a company, a utility will go out and they'll buy each of the services separately. So they'll go buy the uranium, and then they'll pay to have it shipped to a converter who they will then pay to do the conversion services. Then it'll get shipped to the enricher who they'll pay to do the enrichment services. And then it gets shipped to the fabricator that they pay. At the end of the day, what they receive at their site, at the reactor site, is a fuel assembly. So a simple analogy would be, instead of you going out and buying a car from somebody, you actually go out and buy the tires from one person, the engine from somebody else, the doors from somebody else, and have another person put it all together.
Yeah. And you retain title to all the components along the way.
Exactly.
From the time that you dig it up out of the ground to the time that it gets delivered as a finished product at your.
And they do that because it's the cheapest way to do it. They can control cost at each step of the way. I mean, we're never going to do that for a car because it just, I mean, really? let's go buy a car.
People become experts in the car company and become experts. We put the cost on them to do that. Yeah. Are there any outside movers or say parallel industries that you think could be entrants into this? Meaning, like, if somebody's really good at doing stuff outside of nuclear and they're like, oh, well, we're a chemical plant, and so the deconversion process could be easy for us to step in, or centrifuges are used in oil and gas all the time. I assume that like a technology company that services an adjacent industry could step in.
Yeah, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just not easy to get into it. On the deconversion side, I don't know. It's a chemical process, so certainly there could be other companies out there that do it. Whether or not they specialize in it, they already do it. It's one thing to take technology that you have and works versus taking some of your technology and adapting it to it. But there are some things like the laser enrichment that GLE is working on is really interesting and could change the landscape a bit in terms of enrichment capability. So there's certainly some good opportunities out there. So we'll have to see. And I would say, though, that as the industry, the nuclear industry, starts to grow more, and we need more and more enrichment, you never know who decides at that point in time that, hey, yeah, I want a
That's
piece
a
of
good
this,
idea.
and I'll
Look at
get
this
in it.
business opportunity. Yeah.
Right.
You mentioned licensing with the NRC 18 to 24 months. That's not that long, or that, I don't know, compared to a lot of
No,
the other licensing
for
process.
for the enrichment facilities and stuff like that, they've all so Centrus has received a license from NRC, Urenco's received a license from NRC. They know how to do it. It's just a matter of turning the gears and getting it done.
So there's a lot that we've unpacked here. In your mind, what's the most impactful step that we can take to solve this problem?
So the thing that's needed immediately on HALU is for the government to get that draft RFP out, the request for proposals. So they're going to put it out. They're going to get comments from the industry, which would be the customers like us that want HALU, the enrichers that want to sell HALU. You can get that feedback and then take that feedback and turn it into a final request for proposals and get it on the street. It's unfortunate it's
And that'll
taking,
act as the catalyst, potentially,
yes,
to
correct.
try and help kickstart investment into this space.
Right. It's unfortunate that it's taking as long as it has because the Department of Energy did an industry day in October and they had targeted December to have the draft RFP out.
And here we are in May, and it's not there yet.
Correct. Right. And then once they get it going, Congress will need to add more money, appropriate more money. And the industry keeps pushing on that. The industry as a whole keeps pushing on Congress for appropriations. So we keep doing that and we will continue to do that and we continue to push the department. But the thing that has to happen first and foremost is get that RFP out.
Is there any way that people can help, or if somebody listens to this and they want to help in some way?
Hey, it's always good to reach out to your congressman and say, hey, we need HALU, we need to get things going. There's no doubt about that. So, and Congress at the end of the day is going to be, they're the ones who authorized it now. They can put pressure on the administration to move. So that's helpful too. So that's what I'd say. Just get involved.
Gotcha. Okay.
It'd be, I
Everett, this has
bet
been great.
congressman would love to hear people calling up and say, hey, we need HALU. That would be a good one.
That's awesome. So leave us with your most positive version or vision of the future. What's the world going to be like in 5-10 years?
So this is really exciting to me because in the last 5 years, what I've seen is you've got climate change, which is a huge problem, and you've got companies investing in it. That's why we have advanced reactor companies. That's why Oklo's here. That's why other companies are here, is to help provide clean, reliable energy for solving the climate change issue, mitigating climate change. And what you've seen is Congress bipartisan votes and passing legislation, 3 or 4 different pieces of legislation, well as funding and tax credits, which is huge, things that we wouldn't have expected to occur. So now we got the foundation. So where are we going? Well, you're going to see a huge ramp up. As I mentioned, we've got 700 megawatts of interest right now. There's energy shortages. I mean, we don't talk much about it in the United States, but there are areas where you cannot come in and build significant industry because there's not enough power. I was reading something about data centers, and data centers are vitally important to where we're going now and where we are and where we're going. Like a doubling of the amount, more than doubling the power needs for data centers by 2030. And you're talking like 35 gigawatts of power total. I mean, that's huge. Huge. And they all are going to want carbon-free energy. I was hearing a large utility talk that they're getting calls daily now from customers who are like, what's an SMR? How can I get one? I want power that's carbon-free and clean. That wasn't happening 5 years ago. And so 5 years from now, we're going to have, Oklo will have a reactor up and running. A couple other companies will too. By the end of the decade, we'll have larger machines up and running. And then from there, it's just going to take off. And I should say, we've got Vogtle 3 and 4 coming online this year, which are new AP1000s from Southern Company, from Westinghouse Design. So we've got some new nuclear coming on, but the next 5 to 10 years is going to be really interesting.
Absolutely. Everett Redmond, thanks so much. Really appreciate talking to you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.